The morning sun cast long shadows across the village as Maria walked toward the well, her infant son sleeping peacefully in her arms. She had been making this journey every day for 3 months now, ever since little Diego was born. The water was cleaner here than anywhere else in the village, and she needed it for everything: cooking, cleaning, and most importantly, keeping herself healthy so she could continue nursing her baby. As she approached the well, she noticed a man sitting quietly on a nearby rock. He was dressed in simple hunting clothes with weathered hands and kind eyes that seemed to hold years of wisdom. She had seen him around the village before but had never spoken to him. He was known as Carlos, a skilled hunter who lived alone in a small cabin at the edge of the forest. Maria nodded politely as she began drawing water from the well. The baby stirred in her arms, making soft cooing sounds. She adjusted him gently, making sure his blanket covered him properly against the cool morning air. The hunter watched this tender scene with a thoughtful expression. "Beautiful child," Carlos said softly, his voice carrying genuine warmth. "How old is he?" 3 months, Maria replied, pride evident in her voice. "His name is Diego, he's my first." Carlos smiled and looked toward the distant mountains where the morning mist was slowly lifting. "I remember when my own son was that age. Seems like a lifetime ago now." There was a note of sadness in his voice that made Maria look at him more carefully. "You have a son?" she asked, curious about this quiet man who rarely spoke to anyone in the village. "Had," Carlos corrected gently. "He grew up and moved to the big city years ago. Wanted to make his fortune, see the world beyond these mountains. Can't blame him for that. Young men need to find their own way." Maria felt a pang of sympathy for the lonely hunter. She could see in his eyes the love he still carried for his absent son. "Does he visit?" she asked. Carlos shook his head slowly. "Not for 3 years now. Last letter said he was doing well, had a good job, maybe thinking about starting a family of his own. But the city is far and life moves fast there. I understand." The baby began to fuss slightly and Maria recognized the signs that he would need to nurse soon. She looked around, realizing she would need to find a private place. The hunter seemed to notice her concern. "There's a pleasant spot just over there behind those trees," he said, pointing to a small grove near the well, very peaceful and private. "I often rest there myself when I return from hunting." Maria thanked him and moved toward the suggested spot. As she settled down to nurse Diego, she could hear the hunter moving around near the well, but he kept a respectful distance. She appreciated his thoughtfulness. While Diego nursed contentedly, Maria thought about what the hunter had said about his son. She wondered what it would be like when Diego grew up. Would he stay close to home, or would he also feel the pull of distant places? The thought both excited and worried her. After Diego finished nursing, Maria returned to the well to fill her water jars. The hunter was still there, apparently in no hurry to leave. He had a peaceful quality about him that she found comforting. "You're very patient with him," Carlos observed, watching as Maria gently burped the baby. "That's important. Babies can sense when their mothers are calm and content." "Sometimes I worry I'm not doing everything right," Maria admitted. "It's also new to me. My mother died when I was young, so I don't have her guidance." Carlos nodded understandingly. "Every mother worries about that. But look at him, he's healthy, content, growing well. You're doing better than you think." As they talked, other villagers began arriving at the well for their morning water. Maria noticed how they greeted Carlos with respect but also kept their distance. He seemed to prefer it that way, acknowledging their greetings politely but not engaging in long conversations. "I should get back," Maria said, securing her water jars and adjusting Diego in her arms. "My husband will be wanting his breakfast before he goes to work in the fields." "Of course," Carlos said, standing up from his rock. "Perhaps I'll see you here again tomorrow." Maria smiled. "Yes, I come every morning around this time." As she walked back toward the village center, Maria found herself thinking about the hunter's quiet wisdom and gentle manner. There was something about him that reminded her of her own father, who had also been a man of few words but deep understanding. Behind her, Carlos watched until she disappeared around a bend in the path. Then he gathered his hunting gear and headed toward the forest. He had work to do and the day was already growing warm, but the brief conversation had left him with a peaceful feeling he hadn't experienced in a long time. The encounter at the well would prove to be the beginning of an unexpected friendship, though neither Maria nor Carlos could have predicted how their lives would become intertwined in the days ahead. For now, it was simply a pleasant moment of human connection in the quiet rhythm of village life. The next morning brought heavy rain clouds that threatened to open up at any moment. Maria hesitated at her door, looking at the gray sky while Diego slept in her arms. She needed water, but the weather looked terrible. After a few minutes of debate, she decided to risk it and hurried toward the well, hoping to get there and back before the rain started. To her surprise, Carlos was already there, standing under a large tree that provided some shelter. He had apparently been waiting, because when he saw her approaching, he immediately came forward with a large piece of oiled cloth. "I thought you might come despite the weather," he said, helping her arrange the cloth over herself and the baby. "This will keep you both dry." Maria was touched by his thoughtfulness. "You didn't have to wait for me," she said, though she was grateful for the protection from the threatening rain. "I was heading out to check my traps anyway," Carlos replied, though Maria suspected he had come specifically to help her. "Besides, it's nice to have someone to talk to. Gets quiet living alone." As if on cue, the first large raindrops began to fall. Carlos quickly helped Maria move to better shelter under the tree's thick canopy. The baby remained peacefully asleep, undisturbed by the change in weather. "Tell me about your hunting," Maria said, settling herself comfortably against the tree trunk. "I've always been curious about how you track animals in the forest." Carlos's eyes lit up with interest. It had been a long time since anyone had asked him about his work. "It's mostly about patience and observation," he began. "You learn to read the signs, broken twigs, footprints in soft earth, the way birds behave when they've been disturbed." He went on to describe how different animals moved through the forest, how weather affected their behavior, and how important it was to understand their patterns. Maria found herself fascinated by his knowledge of the natural world. "My father tried to teach me some of these things when I was young," Carlos continued, "but I was too eager, too impatient. It wasn't until I had my own son that I really understood the value of taking time to observe and learn." "What was your son like as a child?" Maria asked, noticing how Carlos's expression softened whenever he mentioned his boy. "Miguel was curious about everything," Carlos said with a fond smile. "Always asking questions, always wanting to explore. I used to take him into the forest with me, teach him to identify animal tracks, show him which plants were safe to eat, which ones to avoid." The rain had intensified, creating a steady drumming sound on the leaves above them. Diego stirred slightly but remained asleep, seemingly lulled by the rhythmic sound. "He loved those trips," Carlos continued. "We would spend whole days together, just the two of us in the forest. I thought he would grow up to be a hunter like me, maybe even better. But as he got older, he became more interested in books, in learning about places far from here." Maria could hear both pride and sadness in the hunter's voice. "That must have been difficult for you when he decided to leave." Carlos nodded slowly. "It was, but I knew I couldn't hold him back. A man has to follow his own path, make his own choices. Still, I miss those days when he was small and thought his old father knew everything worth knowing." As they talked, Diego began to wake up, making soft sounds that indicated he would soon need to nurse. Maria looked around, realizing that the rain had created a natural curtain of privacy around their sheltered spot. "Would you mind if she began, gesturing toward the baby. "Of course not," Carlos said immediately, turning his attention to the rain and the forest beyond, giving her complete privacy while still maintaining a protective presence. While Diego nursed, Maria found herself thinking about the relationship between Carlos and his son. She could see how much love the older man still carried, and she wondered if Miguel fully understood what he had given up when he left for the city. "Carlos," she said softly, "have you ever thought about visiting your son in the city?" The hunter was quiet for a long moment. "I've thought about it," he admitted, "but I'm not sure I would fit in there, and I don't want to be a burden to him. He's building his own life now." "I don't think a visit from his father would be a burden," Maria said gently. "Maybe he misses you too but doesn't know how to say it." Carlos turned to look at her, and she could see him considering her words carefully. "Perhaps," he said finally. "Perhaps you're right." The rain began to lighten, and Maria could see patches of blue sky appearing between the clouds. Diego had finished nursing and was now alert and content, looking around with bright, curious eyes. "The weather's clearing," Carlos observed. "You should be able to get home without getting soaked." Maria carefully arranged Diego in his blanket and prepared to leave their shelter. "Thank you for waiting for me and for keeping us dry. You're very kind." It was my pleasure, Carlos replied sincerely. I enjoyed our conversation. As Maria gathered her water and prepared to leave, she turned back to the hunter. Carlos, if you do decide to write to your son or visit him, I think you should. A father's love is precious, and children need to know they're remembered and cherished no matter how far they travel. Carlos watched her walk away, her words echoing in his mind. For the first time in years, he found himself seriously considering reaching out to Miguel. The conversation with Maria had stirred something in him, a hope he had thought was long buried. The rain stopped completely as he made his way into the forest, but his thoughts remained focused on his son and the possibility of bridging the distance that had grown between them. 3 weeks had passed since the rainy morning conversation, and Maria looked forward to her daily meetings with Carlos at the well. Their friendship had grown naturally, built on shared moments of quiet understanding and mutual respect. Diego had grown noticeably during this time, becoming more alert and responsive to the world around him. On this particular morning, Maria arrived at the well to find Carlos sitting on his usual rock, but something was different about him. He held a letter in his hands, and his expression was a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Good morning, Maria called out cheerfully as she approached. You look like a man with news to share. Carlos looked up, a hesitant smile spreading across his weathered face. I received a letter yesterday, he said, holding up the envelope. From Miguel. Maria's eyes widened with interest. Your son wrote to you? What does he say? That's just it, Carlos said, his voice filled with wonder. After our conversation about reaching out to him, I finally worked up the courage to write. I told him about my daily life here, about missing him, about hoping he was happy and healthy. I wasn't sure he would even respond. Diego began to fuss slightly, and Maria automatically began the gentle swaying motion that usually calmed him. But he did respond. That's wonderful news. Carlos nodded, still looking somewhat amazed. He says he's been thinking about home more lately. He got married 8 months ago to a wonderful woman named Elena, and they're expecting their first child in the spring. Maria felt a warm rush of happiness for the hunter. Carlos, that's incredible. You're going to be a grandfather. The full impact of the news seemed to hit Carlos again as she said the words. A grandfather, he repeated softly. I never dared to hope. Miguel also says he wants to bring Elena here to meet me, to see where he grew up. They're planning to visit next month. As if sensing the joyful atmosphere, Diego stopped fussing and looked around with bright, curious eyes. Maria adjusted him in her arms, making sure he was comfortable before continuing the conversation. You must be so excited, she said, noting the way Carlos's entire demeanor had changed. He seemed younger somehow, more alive than she had ever seen him. Excited and terrified, Carlos admitted with a laugh. It's been so long since I've had visitors. I'm not sure my little cabin is suitable for a married couple, especially one expecting a baby. And what if Elena doesn't like the simple way we live here? What if they find it too quiet, too isolated? Maria could see that the hunter's joy was being tempered by worry and self-doubt. She thought carefully before responding. Carlos, your son chose to write back to you, chose to plan this visit. That tells me he wants to reconnect, to share this important time in his life with you. As for Elena, any woman who marries your son and agrees to travel here to meet you must understand what's important to him. Carlos considered her words, slowly nodding. You're right, of course. I suppose I'm just nervous about being a good host, about showing them that their visit matters to me. Why don't you tell me about your cabin? Maria suggested. Maybe we can think of some simple ways to make it more comfortable for guests. Carlos began describing his modest home. 2 small rooms, a stone fireplace, a kitchen area with a hand pump for water. As he talked, Maria could visualize the space and began making mental notes about small improvements that could make a big difference. The main room has my father's old table and chairs, Carlos said. They're sturdy but worn, and I have only one bed, though I could easily sleep by the fireplace and give them the bedroom. That sounds like a good start, Maria said encouragingly. What about fresh linens, perhaps some wildflowers from the meadow? Simple touches that show you've prepared for them with care. Diego had fallen asleep during their conversation, lulled by the gentle movement and the sound of their voices. Maria adjusted his position carefully, making sure he remained comfortable. There's something else, Carlos said, his voice becoming more thoughtful. Miguel writes that he's been telling Elena stories about his childhood here, about the forest and the mountains, about learning to track animals and identify plants. She's apparently very interested in learning about these things herself. Maria smiled. That sounds like she appreciates the knowledge you have to share. Maybe you could plan some walks in the forest, show her the places that were special to you and Miguel when he was young. I hadn't thought of that, Carlos said, his eyes brightening. There's a beautiful clearing about an hour's walk from here, where we used to have our lunch when we spent whole days in the forest. And there's a stream nearby with the clearest, coldest water you've ever tasted. As Carlos spoke about the forest locations, Maria could hear the deep love he had for the land and the precious memories it held. She realized that sharing these places with Miguel and Elena would be a perfect way for Carlos to express his feelings and create new memories with his growing family. You know, she said thoughtfully, I think this visit is going to be even better than you imagine. Your son is bringing his wife to meet you because he wants to share his roots with her, wants her to understand where he comes from. That's a beautiful thing. Carlos looked at the letter again, reading certain passages silently. He also asks about the village, about whether people he knew are still here. He mentions Mrs. Rodriguez, who used to give him sweets when he was small, and old Pedro, who taught him to whittle. Mrs. Rodriguez still makes the best sweets in the village, Maria said with a laugh. And Pedro, though slower now, still sits in the square on sunny afternoons, carving little animals from wood. I'm sure they would both be delighted to see Miguel again. The morning was growing warmer, and other villagers would soon be arriving at the well. Maria began to gather her things, but she could see that Carlos was still processing all the emotions that came with his son's letter. Carlos, she said gently, this is the beginning of something wonderful. Try not to worry so much about the details. Focus on the joy of having your son come home, of meeting the woman he loves, of knowing that soon there will be a new generation to carry on your family's story. As Maria walked back toward the village, she felt genuinely happy for the kind hunter who had become such a valued friend. The prospect of Carlos reuniting with his son filled her with warmth, and she found herself already looking forward to hearing about the visit when it happened. The day of Miguel's arrival had finally come, and Carlos had spent the previous week preparing his cabin with an attention to detail that surprised even himself. He had cleaned every corner, gathered fresh wildflowers for the table, and even borrowed some extra blankets from neighbors. His nervousness was evident to anyone who looked closely, but underneath it lay a deep, quiet joy. Maria arrived at the well earlier than usual that morning, hoping to catch Carlos before he left to meet his son at the village's small bus station. She found him there, dressed in his cleanest clothes, pacing back and forth with barely contained energy. The big day, she said warmly, adjusting Diego in her arms. How are you feeling? Like I haven't slept in a week, Carlos admitted with a nervous laugh. The bus should arrive in about an hour. I keep wondering if I'll recognize him. It's been 3 years and people change. Diego was unusually alert this morning, as if he could sense the excitement in the air. His bright eyes moved from Carlos to his mother, taking in everything around him with obvious curiosity. You'll recognize him, Maria said with confidence. He's your son. That connection doesn't fade with time. Carlos nodded, though his hands continued to fidget with the letter he carried in his pocket. I've read his letter so many times I could recite it from memory. He says Elena is excited to meet me, to see the forest, to learn about our way of life here. But what if she finds it too primitive? What if they decide to cut their visit short? Maria could see that Carlos was working himself into a state of worry that wouldn't help anyone. She decided to try a different approach. Tell me about the last time you saw Miguel. What was that like? Carlos's expression softened as he recalled the memory. He had just finished his schooling and received a job offer in the city. He was so excited, so full of plans and dreams. We spent his last evening here sitting by the fire, talking about everything and nothing. He promised to write regularly, to visit when he could. And did he keep those promises? For the first year, yes, Carlos said. But then life got busy for him, and the letters became less frequent. I understood, but I missed our connection. Diego began to make soft cooing sounds, and Maria smiled down at him before continuing. But now he's coming back, bringing his wife to meet you. That tells me he never forgot the importance of that connection, even when life got complicated. Before Carlos could respond, they heard the distant sound of the bus approaching the village. His face immediately tensed with anticipation and anxiety. That's them, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Go," Maria encouraged him. "Go meet your son and his wife. And Carlos, trust that everything will be fine. Love has a way of bridging any gaps that time might have created." Carlos nodded gratefully and began walking quickly toward the village center. Maria watched him go, hoping fervently that the reunion would bring him the happiness he deserved. Later that afternoon, Maria was surprised to see 3 figures approaching the well. Carlos was leading the way, followed by a young man who shared his strong build and kind eyes, and a pregnant woman with warm smile and curious expression. Even from a distance, Maria could see that Carlos looked more relaxed and happy than she had seen him since receiving the letter. "Maria," Carlos called out as they drew near, "I'd like you to meet my son Miguel and his wife Elena." Miguel stepped forward with an easy smile that reminded Maria strongly of his father. "Father has told us so much about you," he said warmly. "He says you've been a good friend to him, and for that I'm very grateful." Elena, despite being several months pregnant, moved with grace and energy. "Carlos has been telling us about your baby," she said, looking with obvious delight at Diego. "He's beautiful, may I?" Maria carefully transferred Diego to Elena's arms and was touched to see how naturally the young woman held him. "I'm hoping to learn everything I can about caring for babies while we're here," Elena said with a laugh. "This will be our first and I have so many questions." Carlos beamed with pride as he watched his son and daughter-in-law interact with Maria and Diego. "I've been showing them around the village," he said. "Elena wants to learn about the herbs we use for cooking and medicine, and Miguel has been amazed by how much the place has changed and how much has stayed the same." "It's smaller than I remembered," Miguel said, looking around at the familiar landscape, "but more beautiful too, somehow. I think I was too eager to leave when I was young to really appreciate what we have here." Elena gently swayed with Diego, who seemed completely content in her arms. "The air is so clean here and everything is so peaceful. I can understand why you love it, Carlos." "Elena is a teacher in the city," Miguel explained proudly. "She's especially interested in learning about traditional ways of life, about how people lived before all the modern conveniences." "It's fascinating," Elena agreed, carefully transferring Diego back to Maria. "Carlos has been telling us about tracking animals, about reading weather patterns, about knowing which plants are safe to eat. These are skills that people are losing in the modern world." Maria could see how much this appreciation meant to Carlos. His chest was visibly swelling with pride as he listened to his daughter-in-law's genuine interest in his knowledge and way of life. "Tomorrow I'm going to take them to the clearing where Miguel and I used to have our lunches," Carlos said excitedly. "And Elena wants to learn to identify different types of trees and wildflowers." "That sounds wonderful," Maria said, genuinely pleased to see how well the visit was going. "And how long will you be staying?" 2 weeks, Miguel replied. "I have some time saved up from work and we wanted to make this a real visit, not just a quick trip." As they talked, Diego began to show signs that he would soon need to nurse. Maria excused herself to find a private spot, and Elena immediately offered to help her find a comfortable place. "Actually," Carlos said, "there's a lovely spot just beyond those trees, very peaceful and private." As the women walked away, Maria could hear Carlos and Miguel talking quietly behind them. There was an ease between father and son that hadn't been there earlier in the day. A natural falling back into old patterns of communication and affection. "Your father-in-law is a remarkable man," Maria told Elena as she settled down to nurse Diego. "He has so much wisdom and kindness to share." Elena nodded enthusiastically. "Miguel has been telling me stories about his childhood here for months, but meeting Carlos in person has been even better than I expected. He's so patient with all my questions, so willing to share what he knows, and you can see how much he loves Miguel, how proud he is." As they returned to the men, Maria felt a deep satisfaction in seeing Carlos so happy and animated. The reunion she had hoped for was clearly exceeding everyone's expectations. "We should let you get home to your husband," Miguel said considerately, "but I hope we'll see you again while we're here. Father speaks of you as a dear friend." "I'm at the well every morning around this time," Maria said. "I'd love to hear about your adventures in the forest." As the 3 visitors walked back toward Carlos's cabin, Maria watched them with a heart full of joy. Sometimes, she reflected, the most important journeys are the ones that bring us back home. A week into Miguel and Elena's visit, Maria arrived at the well to find Elena sitting alone. looking thoughtful and somewhat tired. The morning was cool and misty, with dewdrops still clinging to the grass and flowers around the well. "Good morning," Maria called softly, not wanting to startle the pregnant woman. "Where are Carlos and Miguel this morning?" Elena looked up with a warm smile, though Maria noticed she moved a bit stiffly as she adjusted her position. "They went out very early to check some hunting traps that Carlos wanted to show Miguel. I decided to stay behind and rest a bit. This little one," she patted her rounded belly, "has been particularly active lately and I didn't sleep very well." Maria felt immediate concern. "Are you feeling all right? Should I call for the village doctor?" "Oh, I'm fine," Elena assured her quickly. "Just the normal discomforts of pregnancy. Actually, I was hoping to have a chance to talk with you alone. I have so many questions about caring for a baby, and you seem so natural with little Diego." Diego was indeed having one of his alert, happy mornings, looking around with bright curiosity at everything around him. Maria settled down near Elena, appreciating the chance to share her experiences with someone who would soon need the knowledge. "What would you like to know?" Maria asked. "Though I should warn you, I'm still learning myself." "Every day brings something new." Elena laughed softly. "That's actually reassuring. Everyone in the city acts like there's a perfect way to do everything. Like if you just read enough books and follow enough rules, you'll have all the answers." "Books can be helpful," Maria said, "but babies don't read books. They just know what they need and you learn to understand their signals. Diego tells me when he's hungry, when he's tired, when he just wants to be held and comforted," as if to demonstrate. Diego began making soft sounds and moving his arms in a way that Maria had learned meant he was getting hungry. "See?" she said with a smile. "Right on schedule." Elena watched with fascination as Maria found a comfortable nursing position. "Miguel's father has been wonderful, but I can see how much he misses having a baby in the family. Yesterday he was telling me about when Miguel was small, about all the little things he used to do. Carlos would make a wonderful grandfather," Maria agreed. "He has such patience and gentleness. You're lucky to have him." "I know," Elena said warmly. "Miguel was worried that I might find his father too set in his ways, too different from what I'm used to in the city. But Carlos has been nothing but kind and welcoming, and the knowledge he has about living close to the land, it's incredible." While Diego nursed contentedly, Maria found herself studying Elena more carefully. The young woman had an obvious enthusiasm for learning, but Maria could also see signs of the fatigue that often came with pregnancy. "How are you feeling about becoming a mother?" Maria asked gently. "It's exciting, but it can also be overwhelming to think about." Elena's hand moved automatically to her belly. "Scared and excited and grateful all at once," she admitted. "Miguel is so confident that everything will be fine that we'll figure it out as we go. But sometimes I lie awake at night wondering if I'll know what to do, if I'll be a good mother." "Every mother worries about that," Maria assured her. "I think the fact that you care so much about doing it right means you're already on the right path. Carlos told me yesterday that Miguel was born right here in the village, with just the local midwife to help," Elena said. "That seems so brave to me. In the city we have hospitals and doctors and all kinds of medical equipment." Maria nodded thoughtfully. "Both ways have their advantages. Here you have the comfort of familiar surroundings and people who know you. In the city, you have more medical resources if something goes wrong. The important thing is that you feel safe and supported." Diego finished nursing and Maria began the gentle process of burping him. Elena watched every movement with obvious interest, as if memorizing the techniques for future use. "May I try holding him?" Elena asked hesitantly. "Miguel says I need to practice, but I'm always afraid I'll do something wrong." "Of course," Maria said, carefully transferring Diego to Elena's arms. "Support his head like that, perfect. You're a natural." Elena's face lit up with joy as Diego settled comfortably in her arms. "He's so warm and solid," she marveled. "I keep expecting our baby to feel different somehow, but I suppose they're all just tiny people with the same basic needs." "Exactly," Maria confirmed. "Food, warmth, comfort, and love. Everything else you can learn as you go." As they sat together, both women were quiet for a while, each lost in their own thoughts about motherhood and the future. The morning mist was beginning to lift, revealing the beautiful landscape that surrounded their village. "Maria," Elena said eventually, "can I ask you something personal?" "Of course." Do you ever worry about Diego growing up and leaving the way Miguel left Carlos? I can see how much it hurt Carlos when his son moved away, and I wonder if that's just the natural way of things. Maria considered the question carefully. I try not to think too far ahead, she said finally. Right now, Diego needs me completely, and I treasure that closeness. But I hope that when he's grown, I'll have given him both roots and wings, a strong foundation of love and values, but also the courage to follow his own dreams. That's beautiful, Elena said softly. I can see why Carlos values your friendship so much. You have a way of seeing things clearly. In the distance, they could hear the sound of men's voices approaching. Carlos and Miguel appeared on the path, walking easily together and talking animatedly about something they had seen during their morning expedition. How are my two favorite ladies? Miguel called out as they drew near. I hope you've been taking good care of each other. We've been having a wonderful conversation, Elena replied, carefully transferring Diego back to Maria. I've learned so much about babies and motherhood. Carlos looked pleased to see the two women getting along so well. Elena has been asking excellent questions about everything, he told Maria. Yesterday she wanted to know about preserving food for winter, and this morning she was curious about the different bird calls we heard in the forest. I want to learn as much as I can while we're here, Elena explained. These skills and knowledge, they're treasures that shouldn't be lost. Miguel put his arm around his wife's shoulders, and Maria could see the love and pride in his eyes. She's already talking about bringing our child here every summer to learn from his grandfather, he said, looking at Carlos with obvious affection. Carlos's face brightened with unmistakable joy at this news. Really, you would do that? Of course, Elena said firmly. Our child should know where his father came from, should understand the value of the wisdom you have to share. Besides, she added with a laugh, I think I might need regular breaks from city life to remember what really matters. As Maria gathered her things to return home, she felt deeply satisfied with the morning's conversation. The bonds forming between Carlos, Miguel, and Elena were everything she had hoped for, and she could see that Elena would be a wonderful addition to their small circle of friends. On the last day of Miguel and Elena's visit, Maria arrived at the well to find an unexpectedly large gathering. Carlos, Miguel, and Elena were there, but so were several other villagers, including Mrs. Rodriguez with a basket of her famous sweets, old Pedro with one of his carved wooden animals, and even Father Martinez from the village church. Diego seemed fascinated by all the activity, his bright eyes moving from person to person as if trying to understand what made this morning different from all the others. What's all this? Maria asked with a smile, though she suspected she already knew the answer. A farewell celebration, Carlos said, his voice mixing joy with sadness. The villagers wanted to send Miguel and Elena off properly, with good wishes and gifts to remember us by. Mrs. Rodriguez bustled forward with her basket, her face beaming with maternal pride. Miguel, my boy, you've grown into such a fine man, she said, pinching his cheek the way she had when he was small. And Elena, dear, these sweets are made with honey from our own bees. They'll give you strength for the journey and help the baby grow strong. Elena accepted the basket with genuine gratitude, though Maria could see tears forming in her eyes. You're all so kind, she managed to say. This visit has meant more to us than you could possibly know. Old Pedro shuffled forward next, his gnarled hands carefully holding a small wooden figure. For the little one, he said gruffly, placing the carving in Elena's palm. A bear for protection and strength. I made it from wood from the same tree I used for Miguel's toys when he was small. Miguel examined the tiny bear with obvious emotion. Pedro, I still have the horse you carved for me when I was 6. It sits on my desk in the city, and every time I look at it, I think of home. Father Martinez stepped forward with a small leather pouch. Blessed earth from our church garden, he explained to Elena. Plant something beautiful in the city with this soil, and you'll always have a piece of our village growing in your new home. As each villager presented their gifts, Maria found herself deeply moved by the genuine affection being shown to the young couple. She could see that Miguel had not been forgotten during his years away, and that Elena was already being accepted as part of their extended family. Carlos watched all of this with an expression of profound contentment. The worry and nervousness that had marked the beginning of the visit had been completely replaced by peaceful joy. His son had come home, brought his wife to meet them all and promised to return regularly with their future children. "There's something else," Miguel said, his voice carrying across the small gathering. "Elena and I have been talking, and we've made a decision we want to share with all of you." He paused, looking around at the expectant faces of the villagers who had helped raise him. "We've decided to name our baby Carlos if it's a boy, or Carla if it's a girl. We want our child to carry forward the name of someone who represents the very best of this place and these people." The silence that followed was profound. Carlos stood completely still, his mouth slightly open as if he couldn't quite believe what he had heard. Then tears began to flow down his weathered cheeks and he pulled both Miguel and Elena into a fierce embrace. "You honor me beyond words," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Beyond anything I could have dreamed." Mrs. Rodriguez was openly weeping, and even stern old Pedro was wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Maria felt her own tears flowing as she witnessed this moment of pure love and connection. Diego chose that moment to begin fussing, perhaps overwhelmed by all the emotion in the air. Maria automatically began the swaying motion that usually calmed him, but Elena stepped forward. "May I?" she asked softly. "I need the practice, and I think I need to hold something precious right now." Maria carefully transferred Diego to Elena's arms, and the baby immediately settled as if sensing the gentle love surrounding him. Elena looked down at him with a tender expression. "Your child must learn the path ahead," Carlos said quietly, watching Elena with Diego. "But mine still requires a mother's milk." The words came so naturally, so filled with wisdom and understanding, that everyone turned to look at him. In that simple observation, he had captured something profound about the different stages of life, about the needs that change and the love that remains constant. "What a beautiful way to say it," Elena murmured, still swaying gently with Diego. "Yes, your grandchild will need to learn about the world, about making choices and finding their own way. But right now, Diego needs the simple, complete security of his mother's care." Miguel looked at his father with new understanding. "Is that how you felt when I left? That I needed to learn my own path, even though it meant leaving what was familiar and safe?" Carlos nodded slowly. "A parent's job is to give children what they need at each stage of their lives. When you were small, you needed my protection and guidance. When you were older, you needed the freedom to discover who you were meant to become. Now, as a man about to become a father yourself, you need to know that you have roots to return to and support you can count on." The morning sun had risen higher now, warming the air and creating a golden glow around their little gathering. Other villagers began to drift away, understanding that the family needed some private time together before the departure. Maria took Diego back from Elena and prepared to leave as well. But Carlos stopped her. "Maria, before you go, I want you to know how grateful I am for your friendship during these past months. Your words of encouragement gave me the courage to reach out to Miguel, and your wisdom helped me prepare for this visit. You've been a true blessing in my life. The friendship has been a blessing for me too," Maria replied sincerely, "and I hope it will continue long after Miguel and Elena return to the city." "Of course it will," Elena said immediately. "We'll be back for regular visits, and I'll want to hear all about Diego's progress. Plus, I'll need advice about raising little Carlos or Carla." As Maria walked home that morning, she reflected on the beautiful cycle of life she had witnessed. Carlos had learned to let his son go. Miguel had learned to appreciate his roots, and Elena had discovered the value of old wisdom and traditional ways. Soon there would be a new baby to love and nurture, carrying forward the best of both worlds, the security of family traditions and the excitement of new possibilities. The conversation at the well had evolved from daily encounters between strangers into something much deeper, a network of support, understanding, and love that would endure across time and distance. 6 months had passed since Miguel and Elena's visit, and the village had settled back into its familiar rhythms. Maria continued her daily trips to the well, where she and Carlos had resumed their quiet conversations. Diego had grown considerably, becoming more active and curious about the world around him. He could now sit up on his own and was beginning to show interest in solid foods. On this particular spring morning, Maria arrived at the well to find Carlos holding an envelope, his face glowing with excitement. Before she could even greet him properly, he was waving the letter in the air. "It's arrived," he announced joyfully. "The baby was born 3 days ago. A healthy boy, little Carlos. Maria felt a surge of happiness for her friend. Carlos, that's wonderful news. How are Elena and the baby doing? Both doing beautifully, according to Miguel, Carlos said, unfolding the letter to read from it. He writes that baby Carlos has dark hair like his father, but Elena's gentle eyes. He weighed 7 pounds and has what Miguel calls the strongest lungs in the city. Diego, now old enough to be interested in Carlos's animated voice, reached out toward the letter with grasping fingers. Maria gently redirected his attention to a smooth stone she had brought for him to examine. Listen to this, Carlos continued, his voice filled with pride. Miguel says that when baby Carlos cries, Elena sings him the lullabies I used to sing to Miguel when he was small. The old songs are being passed down to a new generation. Maria could see that Carlos was deeply moved by this connection across the generations. That's beautiful. Music and songs have a way of carrying love from one generation to the next. There's more, Carlos said, his excitement building. They're planning to visit this summer when the baby is old enough to travel. Elena wants to bring him here so he can breathe mountain air and sleep under the stars his grandfather knows so well. As if responding to the mention of babies, Diego began making the soft sounds that indicated he was getting hungry. Maria found a comfortable spot to nurse him while Carlos continued sharing news from the letter. Elena sends her special greetings to you, Carlos said, looking up from the letter. She says she thinks of our conversations every day as she learns to care for baby Carlos. She's keeping a journal of all the little things, just like you suggested. I'm so glad that helped her, Maria said, settling Diego into nursing position. Those early days can feel overwhelming, but they're also precious. You forget so quickly how small they were, how they fit perfectly in your arms. Carlos folded the letter carefully and put it back in its envelope. You know, Maria, 6 months ago I was a lonely old man with no hope of ever seeing my son again. Now I'm a grandfather, with a growing family that wants to stay connected to this place and these traditions. Sometimes life surprises you in the most wonderful ways. Maria smiled at her friend's happiness. You deserve all of this joy, Carlos. You never stopped loving Miguel, even when the distance between you felt impossible to bridge. I've been thinking about that conversation we had during the rainstorm, Carlos said thoughtfully. When you encouraged me to reach out to him, I almost didn't have the courage to write that first letter. I kept telling myself that too much time had passed, that he had moved on with his life. Diego paused in his nursing to look around, and Maria gently encouraged him to continue. But you did write the letter. That took real courage. It was your words that gave me that courage, Carlos said gratefully. You helped me see that love doesn't diminish with distance or time. It just waits patiently for the right moment to reconnect. As Diego finished nursing, Maria thought about the changes she had witnessed in Carlos over the past months. The sad, lonely man she had first met at the well had been transformed into someone filled with purpose and joy. His connection with his son had been restored, and now he had a grandson to love and guide. Carlos, she said, adjusting Diego in her arms, what are you most looking forward to about baby Carlos's visit this summer? Carlos's eyes lit up with anticipation. Everything, he said immediately. I want to show him the forest where his father played as a child. I want to teach him to identify bird calls and animal tracks. I want Elena to see how the wildflowers bloom in the meadow. And I want Miguel to share with his son all the stories and traditions that connect him to this land. And I want to see you holding your grandson, Maria added with a warm smile. I have a feeling you're going to be an extraordinary grandfather. I hope so, Carlos said humbly. I want to give him everything I gave Miguel. Love, security, knowledge about the natural world, but I also want to support whatever path he chooses to follow in life. I've learned that letting go and holding on can happen at the same time. Diego had become alert and curious after his feeding, looking around at the familiar surroundings of the well with obvious recognition. He had grown up coming to this place every morning, listening to the voices of his mother and Carlos, learning the rhythms of village life. Look at him, Carlos observed fondly. He knows this place as well as we do. In a few months, baby Carlos will be here too, creating his own memories of morning conversations at the well. Maria realized that Diego represented something important in this continuing story. He was proof that life goes on, that each generation brings new hope and possibility. Soon there would be 2 babies learning about the world, supported by the love and wisdom of their families. You know what I think? Maria said, watching Diego's bright, curious eyes. I think our children are going to grow up together, learning from each other and from all of us. They'll have the best of both worlds, the security of knowing where they come from and the freedom to discover where they want to go. Carlos nodded thoughtfully. Your child must learn the path ahead. Mine still requires a mother's milk, he repeated softly, echoing the words that had become meaningful to both of them. But soon they'll both be exploring the world together, and we'll be here to guide them when they need us and to celebrate their discoveries along the way. As they gathered their things to return to their daily routines, both Maria and Carlos felt a deep sense of contentment. The circle of life continued, bringing new joys and new connections. The well that had been the site of so many important conversations would soon echo with the laughter of children, carrying forward the love and wisdom of their elders into an uncertain but hopeful future. The story that had begun with two strangers meeting at a village well had grown into something larger, a testament to the enduring power of friendship, family, and the courage to reach across any distance to maintain the connections that matter most.